What's up, folks? This is Addy Eds, and this is Public Intelligence. We have an awesome guest this afternoon. We have John Kiriakou, CIA torture whistleblower, former intelligence officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, and now a best-selling author and speaker. And he's also a writer as well. And we're going to talk about the outlets he has written for, his awards as well. He won the 2016 Sam Adams Award for I think it was courage in whistleblowing, and he also spent 2 years at Loretto, which is a federal prison in Pennsylvania. So we're going to talk about that as well. But I want to thank you for coming on the show, John, and just tell you again, it was a pleasure to meet you in person in DC.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine. Happy to be here.
Of course. And I wanted to ask you how you thought the conference went. It was a couple weeks ago now, but you had, I think, the best speech there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think that seemed to be the consensus. But yeah, how did you think it went?
I loved the conference. You know, it's an unusual kind of conference because most of these things, the Washington Institute, the Middle East Institute, they have a very strong pro-Israel bias to them. And this one doesn't. This one is far more pro-Palestinian and talked about issues that you really don't talk about at these other issues or at these other conferences. And the cast of speakers and even the guests, you know, there were some remarkable guests at this thing. It just made it such a worthwhile way to spend a couple of days. And then getting to meet, you know, Roger Waters was thrilling.
Yeah, definitely. I agree, sir. It was great to meet both you guys, and you know, getting to meet new authors and new material, new online outlets as well. But I wanted to ask if we could take it back a little bit. I learned you were actually a teacher at one point in time in my research for this interview. I wanted to ask you how long you taught for and why you decided to start and stop teaching, and then what it is you taught.
Sure. My mom and dad were both public school teachers. My dad he was mostly a principal, but for 44 years, and about 38 of those years were as a principal. My mom was an elementary school teacher for 20 years. And when I was in grad school, I was going to school full time, and having a part-time job just wasn't enough to pay the expenses. So I got a job teaching American history and American government at a small private school on DuPont Circle here in Washington. It was called the Emerson Preparatory Institute. And at the time, this was in the late 1980s, it was primarily for recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. And so it was very specifically tailored to people who also had to, you know, think about scheduling treatment and therapy and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I only did it for 2 years because, like I say, I was in grad school at the time, and it was 2 years well spent. It was a great experience. It really was.
And you taught, was it history?
American history and American government.
Okay. And if you didn't make the decision to go into the CIA, what is another career path you think you might have taken?
Honestly, I really, really wanted to go to film school. I wanted to make documentaries. Oh, wow. Yeah, I wanted to make documentaries, and I know that there's no money in documentaries. There never is, but it always fascinated me. And it's funny now. I've been in, man, I'm not exaggerating, 25, 30 documentaries. One of them was nominated for an Emmy. One was nominated for an Oscar. It's worked out kind of nicely.
Yeah. So in a sense, you achieved that goal anyways, although you were you're in front of the camera instead of behind it, right?
Instead of behind it. Yeah.
And
but I like telling stories in that respect. And a good documentary can really tell a good story.
Do you have some favorites that you can share with us, or documentaries that have really influenced you?
One that I saw recently that was just incredible was Searching for Sugar Man. Have you ever heard of that one?
I haven't. No.
It was nominated for an Academy Award back in, I think, 2016. And it was about this folk singer who came out with an album that nobody really listened to, although he was really good. And then came out with a second album that even fewer people listened to, and then he just sort of disappeared. But what he didn't know was that someone had smuggled these albums into apartheid era South Africa, and he ended up selling more albums in South Africa than the Beatles and Elvis. And nobody ever told him. One of the record label executives just stole the money. And
Oh,
so
wow.
nobody knew, was he still alive? Where did he live? And the documentary filmmakers decided to try to find him. And they found him in Detroit. He's a plumber and lives in this ramshackled, falling down house. But he ended up going to South Africa when they told him that he was the most popular folk singer in the country. He ended up selling out 20 dates and has gone back a couple of times. It was a wonderful story of, the little guy finally winning.
Yeah, sure. Wow, that's great. I might
Yeah.
have to check that one out. And that came out in 2016, you said, so pretty
And it's
recently.
still on. I saw it on Amazon not too long ago. Really terrific.
Okay, okay, excellent. Uh, and as far as the CIA goes, what do you think is not even just one thing, but what's an understanding, at least a basic understanding that the layman should have about the CIA and how it works? Because I think a lot of people don't even know the difference between the CIA and the FBI, for example.
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of people don't know the difference between the CIA and the FBI. Um, in the easiest terms, the CIA's job is very, very simple. It's to recruit spies to steal secrets. Period. That's all they're supposed to do. And then on the analytics side, of course, the analysts evaluate those secrets to provide the policymaker with the best informed background to allow the policymaker to actually make the policy. That's not really the way things have turned out. The CIA does a lot of things that are illegal or unethical or inappropriate. They do that because there's no legal pushback. They do it because the oversight committees in the House and Senate don't stop them. And so they've ended up sort of encroaching on the FBI's mission. Not to say that the FBI hasn't done exactly the same thing, and has encroached on the CIA's mission. But either way, it's wrong. It's likely unconstitutional, and it should be reined in, and it hasn't been. I think at the most basic level, that's something Americans should understand. It is illegal for the CIA or NSA, for that matter, to collect information on American citizens, yet they do it every single day. And that's just wrong.
And what are your thoughts on the other famous whistleblowers? Because you are among the most famous and the first official CIA agent to confirm torture on record, as we know. Do you have relationships with them? Do you read their books? Did you guys know each other before? Yeah, what is that like?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Oh wow.
It's funny. We have like a little club, for lack of a better word. We're all in touch. We get together for dinner. We hang out at conferences. We call each other. We read each other's books. We're in each other's books. And I couldn't have gotten through my own experience without the support of these guys. The most important for me have been Tom Drake from NSA, Jesselyn Radack from the Justice Department, and Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers fame. They've become just wonderful, very close friends. To a very slightly lesser extent, Bill Binney from NSA and Kirk Wiebe, Daniel Hale, the drone whistleblower, Lisa Ling, another drone whistleblower, even Ed Snowden. Ed's dad came to visit me in prison because I had written this I had written an open letter to Ed Snowden that somehow went viral. Millions and millions of hits. It was carried everywhere. And then I followed it up with a private letter that I was able to get to him through a mutual friend at the CIA. And his dad came to prison to thank me for it. Ed's a little tougher to stay in touch with just because of his own circumstances. And he's trying very hard to keep a very low profile right now because of the war in Ukraine and all. But all of us stood up for each other and looked out for each other. And if I didn't have the support of the likes of Tom and Jesslyn and Dan Ellsberg, I'm not sure what I would have done.
Mm-hmm. And did you reach out to them, or did they reach out to you?
No, they all reached out to me.
Wow, that's amazing.
When I first met Jesslyn Radak, it was at her law offices. It was about 4 days after I had blown the whistle, and she had been quoted in the Washington Post talking about my case. And so a mutual friend put us in touch, and I went to her law office to see her. And I was there for, I don't know, it was a long time. It was like 2.5 hours, 3 hours. And at the end of it, I said to her, listen, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak to me, because I know that you only handle whistleblower cases and I'm not a whistleblower. And she said, but you are a whistleblower. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just a guy who, said something. And she said, there's a legal definition of whistleblowing. It's bringing to light any evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety. You're the poster boy for whistleblowers. And it opened my eyes. Just her saying that opened my eyes. And the next thing I knew, people were arranging these discreet dinners. I went to dinner once at a publisher's house. She was a big time supporter of whistleblowers, and Tom Drake was there, and Daniel Ho, who single-handedly brought down Don't Ask, Don't Tell by chaining himself to the White House fence, and Daniel Ellsberg, and a whole bunch of people. And the FBI followed all of us to the dinner, like independently of one another. Like, I've got surveillance, Tom has surveillance, Dan has surveillance, and they all follow us to this one house where we're all getting together for dinner. So we ordered them a pizza and we had it delivered just to show them, you guys aren't so discreet as you think you are. We all spotted you.
Right. Yeah.
And then at the dinner, they followed all of us home.
Wow. And that was something too that went on for years. The surveillance did on you. And then towards the end, it wasn't even surveillance, it seemed. It was just like intimidation. It was like, yeah. And that was some 5 years, right? Or so?
It was 5 years it went on, yeah. It started in early 2000. Actually, it was 5 years that I knew about it. It had actually started 3 years before. So we're talking about 8 years of surveillance.
That must be so much money of the public.
Imagine. Yeah.
So much money.
I actually filed a Freedom of Information Act request asking how much money was spent on my investigation and prosecution, and they refused to answer it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. My lawyers estimated like $6 to $10 million. Like, was it really worth it?
Yeah.
Is society better off having spent $10 million to follow me to Target or Outback Steakhouse,
Or church. That one made me mad. I was like, wow, these people have no shame at all.
And sat in the pew directly behind me. Like, what do they think I'm going to do in the middle of church?
At least sit in the balcony.
Yes, exactly. In the balcony. Exactly.
Could you share with us, John, if you can't, that's fine, but general tips? If somebody tells you're under surveillance, is there any way to tell that you can share with us? Any tips?
I have a book that's coming out next month called The CIA Insider's Guide to Surveillance and Surveillance Detection.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So, yeah, there are several things that you could do. First of all, the first rule of surveillance is don't let them know that that they're following you. right? Don't try to lose them. Don't go the wrong way down the one-way street. Don't speed up and slow down and speed up and slow down. Just go about your normal business. And the reason that you do that is because they're looking to see if they can detect an anomaly. If you're doing something that just simply doesn't make sense. Like, for example, if you're going to do a surveillance detection route to see if you're being followed, it's going to go in 4 phases. The first phase is just leaving from your home or place of work and going to your first cover stop. Now, your first cover stop should be a totally normal thing that you would do in your neighborhood, like 7-Eleven, right? You wouldn't drive 10 miles across town to go to a 7-Eleven over there. That doesn't make any sense. But you would stop at a 7-Eleven in your neighborhood. So you pull in, you get out, you buy a Diet Coke, you get in the car, and then you get off the main roads and start using what are called black roads. Black roads are like little neighborhood cut-throughs, not highways, not major roads. That way you can see who's going to follow you into that neighborhood. And then you do that using black roads to your second cover stop. Now, the second cover stop may be you're taking your clothes to the dry cleaners, or you stop at a wine shop, or you stop at Home Depot and buy a light bulb or something, right? And then you can see if people go inside the establishment with you to see if you're, to see what you're doing in there. Then the third phase is called the aggressive phase. You make use of this technique called stair stepping, where you go 1 block, make a right, 1 block, make a left, 1 block, make a right, 1 block, make a left, like a stair step.
Okay.
And you can see who's making these turns with you. Also, you're keeping in mind, I saw that blue pickup truck an hour ago on the other side of town. Or I remember that minivan because it had this bumper sticker on it. So think to yourself, have I seen these places, or have I seen these vehicles rather before? The definition of surveillance is multiple sightings at time and distance, where you see the same vehicles or the same people at different places at different times during the course of the day.
Okay.
Then the fourth phase to your final destination is called the provocative phase. This is where you're driving and it doesn't make any sense. You're pulling into people's driveways to make a U-turn, or you make an illegal U-turn, or you go around the block, like all the way around the block, and end up where you started. That's just to shake somebody loose. If you've missed someone earlier in the route, you can shake them loose and see, finally, definitively, if you're being followed. But normally I would say, just go about your normal business. You know your neighborhood better than they do. So it would make sense for you to take these black roads and cut-throughs and shortcuts through neighborhoods. But just don't do something that just simply doesn't make sense, because it's going to be alerting to them. You want them to conclude that what you've been doing while they've been following you is totally normal behavior. So you're not interesting to them, and they're going to drop off and they're going to follow somebody else. But if you, like I say, you drive 10 miles across town to go to a 7-Eleven and buy a Diet Pepsi and then drive all the way back home, yeah, that's not normal. Nobody does that.
Right. Wow. And when again does that book come out? That's
They
next month?
just delayed it. Believe it or not, because of the supply chain disruption, there's no paper to print the books on. So
Wow.
it's going to be May 25th now.
That's pretty rare for a writer with a book deal to get a delay, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've delayed it 3 times now. It was
Oh,
supposed to be
wow.
in February. Yeah,
Wow.
there's just no paper.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, that was like one of the first things I saw shooting up in terms of inflation was the wood, paper, lumber, and
Yeah,
such. But as a writer, that must be kind of nice to get that
yeah.
extension.
It's a little well, yeah, because I also have to send everything I write to the CIA's Publications Review Board, and they
Mm,
have to clear it and make sure I'm
mm.
not saying anything classified.
I found it interesting that you said that they don't care what you say on air, but just as long as you don't write it. Is that correct?
Yeah, usually. Because their argument is if you say something on the air, it could have been edited to make it sound like it was something different from what you said. So you're kind of
Mm,
covered for that. I do know a couple of guys, a couple of former CIA officers who, if they know they're going on the air, will write something out and submit it for clearance and then stick to their talking points. That makes for a terrible interview. It makes for a very boring and very stilted interview. But if you
sure.
write something, you have to send it to the publications review board for clearance for the rest of your life.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And likewise, you have it's like a lifetime secrecy
Yeah.
clause too. Yep.
Yeah.
Even
Life.
though they came after you with everything, but the
Yeah,
kitchen sink.
and the frustrating thing is, you look at people who did far worse than I did. I was prosecuted for confirming the last name of a former CIA colleague to a reporter who never made the name public, never. And then you've got David Petraeus, who confirmed the names of 10 covert operatives to his adulterous girlfriend and got 18 months of unsupervised probation. Or I won't say his name because he's never been charged with a crime. There was a disgruntled former CIA officer in Bethesda, Maryland, who made a website and named 17 CIA officers who had wronged him during the course of his career. Half of them were undercover, and he was never charged with a crime. Never. And I said to my lawyer at the time, this was in 2012, how do they let him get away with something like that? They come down on me like a ton of bricks, and they let him just have this website where he's outing people. And my lawyer said, because he didn't blow the whistle on the CIA's torture program. That's what this is about. And
Mm.
I think that was true.
I thought it was kind of tragic how you said the initial. I think it was you said 12 or 13 guys in the room that you were with. There was actually one other guy who said no at first, and
Yes.
then he turned he
He
turned to the
changed his
dark
mind.
side. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought that was really
Yeah.
sad. It was like a
Very
really
sad.
small anecdote, but I was like, oh, so you weren't completely alone for a little bit.
Yeah, for a little bit.
How did
Yeah.
you maybe you want to talk about cool, you do write about it in your book. You mentioned your wife's support really was perhaps the biggest thing that got you through, and you mentioned the whistleblowers as well, but your own CIA training and experience. But regardless, as well prepared as you were, I'd have to imagine that was a really like stressful experience those first few weeks.
Yeah. At my sentencing, my lawyers asked the judge to send me to a minimum security work camp. And at a minimum security camp, they're across the street from main prisons. At a minimum security camp, there are no fences, the doors are unlocked, there are no bars on the windows. You're free to come and go as you please, so long as you're sort of on your honor not to abscond. You probably will end up working in town. There was a university in town, people were janitors there.
Mm,
Um, so my attorneys asked her to send me to this work camp, and the prosecutors had no objection. So she says, okay, I order that you serve your sentence at the minimum security work camp at Loretto, Pennsylvania. And what you do, as odd as it might sound, when you surrender to start a prison sentence, you just drive up to the prison and knock on the door and say, hi, I'm John Kiriakou. I'm here to turn myself in. So I did that, and they said, oh, you got to go across the street to the main prison first, and then they'll process you there, and then they bring you back over here. I said, okay. So I went across the street, knocked on the door. I'm John Kiriakou, here to turn myself in. And they put you through a metal detector, and they x-ray your jacket and whatever. And then the cop starts to lead me around to the back of the actual prison. And I said, no, I'm supposed to be at the camp across the street. And he chuckled and he said, not according to my paperwork, you're not. And I told myself, take it easy. There's nothing you can do. If you raise a ruckus, they're going to put you in solitary. So I didn't say a word. It took them about 40 minutes to process me. You know, they take your picture, they put it on a little badge, and you have to wear this badge. And they gave me, you know, a prison uniform and a towel and a roll of toilet paper and sheets. So they take me to a bunk, and the guy says to me, "Welcome home," and he just walks away. Well, it took me 4 days to get access to a phone. And I called my lawyers and I said, "Hey, they put me in the actual prison with the drug kingpins and the mafia dons." I said, "What do I do?" And my lead attorney said, "Oh man," he said, "we could file a motion, but it'll be 2 years before we get a hearing and you'll be home by then." He said, "I'm sorry, buddy, you're going to have to tough it out." So I thought, well, I'm trained for this kind of thing. I've certainly lived in way worse places around the world than Loretto, Pennsylvania. So, you know, I thought I'm just going to fall back on my CIA training, and I'm going to make sure I stay at the top of the social heap and keep myself safe. I actually wrote a book about it, my second book, and it won 2 literary awards, oddly enough. It's called "Doing Time Like a Spy." My how the CIA taught me to survive and thrive in prison. And I have these 20 life lessons that the CIA taught me. You know, admit nothing, deny everything, make counter accusations, let others do your dirty work. Your mind can take more physical punishment than your body thinks it can. Stuff like that. So 20 of these life lessons, and I use examples for each one on how I was able to, you know, negotiate this maze in prison for 2 years.
I'm really loving reading your book right now, Doing Time Like a Spy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm traveling right now, so I'm just doing it on the ebook, but I'm looking forward to get the paperback and then your new one as well. That's awesome. It segued my question
Well,
perfectly
you
into
know
your
what?
new
I
book.
have 3 of them coming out on the same day. So I have
Oh wow.
the CIA Insider's Guide to Surveillance and Surveillance Detection, the CIA Insider's Guide to Lying and Lie Detection, and the CIA Insider's Guide to Disappearing and Living Off the Grid. Hey, I'll tell you something funny too about that last one.
Yeah.
Um, I was on this podcast, like a right wing extremist guy, but he's a
Sure.
nice guy, right? I disagree with him, but I like him. He's a nice guy. So he said, "Oh, would you come on my podcast?" I said, "Sure." So we went to a commercial break, and he asked me, "So what are you working on?" And I said, "Oh, I just finished these 3 books." And I told him, and the last one I said was The Insider's Guide to Disappearing and Living Off the Grid. And he goes, "John, that book has right-wing extremism written all over it. We have to do a Zoom lecture, and for $100, everybody gets a copy of the book. You'll make a fortune." I said, "Hey, that's a good idea, so maybe I'll try it."
Wow. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, and if you want to talk a bit about either of those, because I think a deception book is it like lying book, right? I think that'd be really interesting to read about.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. I have a really great relationship with Skyhorse Publishing. They've published my last 5 books, and they told me recently, it was the most fascinating thing, that they found a book. It was a manual, a CIA manual that was published in 1955 on how to pick locks, and it's in the public domain because it's so old. And so they just reissued it with a new cover, and much to their shock, it made number 10 on the New York Times bestsellers list.
Wow.
So they asked me if I would scour the internet, find whatever declassified CIA manuals are out there, and then maybe I could write a new introduction for each one, and they can re-release them. So I'm looking at them right now. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 that I found on everything from how to make a key mold out of mud if you're in the woods to let's see, the field explosive guide, the CIA writing style guide, how to recruit spies to steal secrets. There are a lot of them.
Wow. Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing,
The big one is
John.
the CIA torture guide called KU Bar from the 1950s. It's
Oof.
nasty. It's nasty, and it takes lessons from, you know, the communist Chinese, from the Belgians in the Congo at the turn of the 20th century, from the Vietnamese when they were fighting the French. The nastiest regimes in the world, and it brings all of their torture techniques into one guide, and that's what the CIA was using in the 50s and 60s.
Lord, wow, that's
Awful.
yeah, that's really really dark, and that's public domain.
Yeah,
That
public domain. People call it Kubar. It's not Kubar. It's KU bar, BAR. KU is a digraph that it means a lot in the CIA. People wouldn't understand it, but KU bar is the code word that was used for the early torture program.
okay, and that was like you said, mid 20th century or
Yeah, mid 20th
thereabouts.
century. Yeah, they
Okay,
published it in like 52 or 55, and then it came out again in the early 70s.
okay, okay. Wow, and I would like to ask you about your writing process. So, what is that like? How does that manifest for you? What do you find works for you?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, it's funny. I've given hundreds upon hundreds of interviews, and nobody's ever asked me that before. Um, I write a lot, and in part it's because I have trouble sleeping, and I figured there's no sense in laying in bed feeling sorry for myself when I can be writing something and making $400. You know, so so I'll
Sure.
come down at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'll write 800 words. I'll send it to some newspaper, and then I go back to bed. When it comes to books, books are different. I write in spurts. Like, for example, most of the books that I've written have been commissioned, where the publisher will call me and say, hey, I need 60,000 words on XYZ. And so I'll sit, and it usually takes me about 9 months, and I'll write a book. There was one book, my third book, on Abu Zubaydah, where the publisher called and said, I need a book in 30 days. And I laughed. I said, it's not possible. And he said, we really, really need this book in 30 days. So they sent me a check, and I said to my wife, I'm going to sit at the computer every day, and I am not going to get up until I've written 2,000 words. And so I started the day after Thanksgiving, and I finished the book the day before Christmas. But that's the fastest I ever wrote one. I'm writing one now, like, for myself. Honestly, I think that in the end, it's going to be one of my most popular books, but I'm writing the definitive guide to Washington, D.C.'s historic cemeteries. It's something
Oh,
that I've always been interested in. There are some incredible stories out there that are just begging to be told. And honest to God, the last couple of weeks, there were 2 days, this past Sunday and the week previous Saturday, where I sat down and I wrote 10,000 words each one of those 2 days. So I'm writing this book so quickly that I'm actually behind now on the photography. I've got to take pictures of all these grave sites. I've got to take pictures of the cemetery entrances. I have to look through historic pictures of the people who I'm writing about. I'm writing so fast that I've just gotten ahead of the rest of the book.
do
And then
you? Yeah, go ahead, John.
I wrote a 3,000 word piece for Sheer Post for Robert Sheer the other day. He's a former Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He's a professor now at USC, and he commissioned a 3,000 word piece on the Abu Zubaydah capture. So I wrote it and I sent it to him. I'm very proud of the way I write. I require very little in the way of editing, and
I want to get there one day, John. I'm just gonna
you,
keep reading your books. I'm just gonna keep
you
reading your books.
the best advice I ever had, I wrote the first draft of my first book and I gave it to my wife and asked her to read it. And when she finished it, I said, what do you think? And she said, honestly, I think it's terrible. And I said, really? She said, yeah. She said, it's so boring and so dry. It looks like a government report. And I said, I can't believe what I'm hearing. And she said, honey, I have listened to you tell these stories 1,000 times. You should write them exactly as you tell them. And it utterly changed my writing style. Just that advice. So instead of writing in the way the CIA trained me to write, which really was like a boring government report, to not have one extra word, one unnecessary word, because the president doesn't have time to focus on your bullshit extra words, right?
Sure.
So I completely changed my writing style, and I started writing as if I were telling a story. And so that first book made number 5 on the New York Times bestsellers list. Doing Time Like a Spy won Forward Review's Memoir of the Year, and it won the PEN First Amendment Award, one of the big 4, with the Pulitzer, the PEN Faulkner, and the Edgar Allan Poe. I won that in 2016. It was great advice. And so that's what I try to do. I try to be a storyteller. So anyway, I wrote this 3,000 word piece on Abu Zubaydah's capture, and I got a call. This is about a week ago. I got a call from a guy, and he said, "You don't know me, but I'm Bernie Sanders' literary agent." And I said, "Oh, how interesting." I said, "I love Bernie Sanders." And he said, "I just read your piece at Sheer Post on Abu Zubaydah. Would you be interested in turning it into a book?" And I said, wow, writing 3,000 words on torture is one thing, but writing 60,000 words on torture is an entirely different thing. And he said, I can sort of guide you through the chapters, what I want you to address. But he said, I think we can go back to Random House, Penguin, St. Martin's, one of the big ones. And I said, yeah. I said, that sounds good. I think I'm going to do it. Yeah.
Wow. Fantastic. Congratulations, John. I'm looking
Thank
forward to that one as well.
Thank you.
And I wanted to bring up the PEN Amendment Award, which you won, and along with Sibel Edmonds, who I wanted to bring up because of this idea I had with my first book of public intelligence being open source media combined with whistleblowers. So that kind of distinguishes it from open source intelligence, which doesn't include someone like yourself or Miss Edmonds. So I kind of see that as the solution to the media problem.
That would be a good one. The Soviets used to call that mosaic intelligence.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
That you can take open source intelligence and information from whistleblowers, put it together in a mosaic. And even if you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, you can at least see what the puzzle is.
I love that. Yeah. I love that metaphor. That's great. Yeah. I think that's so it wasn't I just used a different term. I knew it wasn't an original idea. I was like, somebody else must have thought of this.
Yeah, but I'm not sure anybody's actually written about it. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah. I'll send you my next edition, John, for free.
Love to see it.
Yeah, of course, sir. And I'll include you in it as well, and other people that I've met along the way, because that's something too. Is pretty much everyone in the book I've either interviewed or had another interaction with. But yeah, what is your idea for a solution to this? Because the media is a huge problem. I think the corporate media, certainly with getting people to understand even basic things, let alone CIA skullduggery.
Yeah, good question. I think the bottom line is that you have to be utterly diligent in your own analysis of the information. And I'll give you an easy and current example. So a friend of mine called me the other day. She's ethnic Ukrainian, but an American citizen. And she said, can you believe that we've killed 7 Russian generals already? It's incredible. It's going to turn the whole war around. And I said, yeah, I saw that. I saw that report, but what's the sourcing? What do you mean? And I said, well, you got to look at the sourcing. Who says that the Ukrainians have killed 7 generals? Well, as it turns out, the Ukrainians say it. So, I mean, who are these generals? Where are their bodies? Right? What are their commands? You can't just kill a general and then the Russians say, oh, well, general's dead. Well, they're going to appoint somebody else and they're going to make an announcement, right? Or somebody in Washington's going to leak it. You can't just say, that you read this article and it said that the Ukrainians killed 7 generals. So it's fact. It's just done. It's fact. So, we've got to look at everything with a very careful analytic eye. One of the things that I do as soon as I wake up in the morning, as soon as I get out of the shower, I go straight to the computer and I read everything from the far left to the far right and everything in between. I read the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, but then I go to, the Huffington Post and Fox News and everything. The Drudge Report. You've got to see what all sides are saying, because oftentimes they're saying things that are nothing like what the others are saying. I tend to give a lot of weight to things that come out of think tanks, but only after investigating to see who's financing the think tanks.
Okay. Do you have any trusted think tanks or other outlets that you're like, I usually want to see what they're saying and that they're usually on the ball?
It's easier to tell you which ones I have a problem with.
Sure, I bet. Yeah.
I have a problem with the Center for Strategic and International Studies at Georgetown University because they're financed by the biggest arms manufacturers and defense contractors in America. So there's never, ever any criticism of U.S. foreign policy or defense policy. Never. And that's just not acceptable. On the left, the Brookings Institute is fantastic. On the right, the American Enterprise Institute is good, but it's very, very neocon. If you want more traditional conservative, it's the Heritage Foundation, but they tend to do more on domestic policy than on foreign policy. The Hoover Institute is good on foreign policy, but it's also pretty neocon. One of my go-tos is the Reason Foundation and Reason Magazine. They're terrific. So, read all of it and then come to your own conclusions.
Definitely. And that's a great, I think, note to end on. I want to be respectful of your time, John. Where can people find your work? Where can they support you? How can they do that?
Thank you very much. Well, I write at consortiumnews.com, at covertactionmagazine.com, and at the sheerpost.com. And I've got my own site at johnkiriakou.com, and I'm on Twitter and Facebook and all the usual places.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John, for joining me. I hope we
can
do this again. And thank you to the audience for joining us as well. Stay frosty, folks, and we will see everybody next time.